This book is 123,000 words. That's like, 430 pages with, pretty big font. Not big, but, it doesn't have tiny font. It is also a standalone book. It's for starting its plot and introducing its characters. It's unable to rely on work that previous books have done. And yet, it has one of the best starts to any book that I've ever read. It has to compete with books in middles of series that have a ton of stuff to work with. And it basically, in my opinion, beats pretty much all of them. It has to, in terms of how complete of a story it tells, and how rich of a setting and characters it explores, and themes, it has to compete with, million-word series, 1,000-page books, series full of 1,000-page books, and it has 430. And I think it basically beats almost all of them. This is a review of A Brightness Long Ago, the second last book that I have read by Guy Gavriel Kay, and just an absurdly good book. Okay, A Brightness Long Ago by Guy Gavriel Kay. Let's get into it. The first thing worth noting, because the man obviously has some level of interconnected world, is if you're looking at this and going, hey, Jake, I've never read a book by Guy Gavriel Kay. Can I read this one? Now, if you're watching this video in the future, and I've already made my Where to Start Guy Gavriel Kay video, which is going to come in the future, then you know the answer to that. But for those of you who are in the now, well, not the now from my perspective, but the now of this video just recently came out, I haven't answered that already. And the answer is probably. The book does connect to, especially the Sarantine mosaic. I think it technically, it has tiny connections to the lines of Our Song that are basically irrelevant. It takes place right around the equivalent of 1500 AD. So the siege of Sarantium is going on during this book. For those who don't know, I don't know why I'm assuming everyone knows this. The Sarantine mosaic has a city of Sarantium, which is Guy Gavriel Kay's stand-in for Constantinople, which was a city that was under siege at the time of this book, and is also under siege. The fictional version of it is also under siege at the time of this book. If you're wondering why he changes the names of everything, I'll link an essay about it he wrote in the description. It's a pretty good answer. Anyways, I think the Sarantine mosaic is relevant to this book. However, from what I've seen, the people who've read this in the opposite order I did, as in this and then the Sarantine mosaic, seem to think that it works both ways. I probably think it's slightly better to read Sarantine and then this, but if you don't care about it that much, it's also good the other way. This isn't like there are some Cosmere connections where something is a really big deal in one book and then a really small deal in the other book. So the connection the other way is who cares? Because if you read the book where it's a big deal, second, you're not going to be like, oh, it's that thing that's like a one-off mention in this other book, because why would you care? It's not really a thing in the other series. It's not really like that. I think the connection should work in both ways. So you probably can start with this. And it has a lot of upsides when it comes to starting with this. And I think it's going to be one of the books that I consider a very good place to start with. This is, as I have said in many of my other videos, when it comes to writing, Guy Gavriel Kay kind of just does what he wants. So in this book, the thing he's kind of tried doing, well, I think succeeded at doing, but, trying was step one to succeeding, is this book is both first-person retrospective and also, some sections of it are first-person retrospective, while other sections of it are from a third-person omniscient narrator. Most of Guy Gavriel Kay books, I think, are third-person omniscient, but there's some that is, limited. I think it's omniscient, but sometimes the omniscient narrator gets, pretty deep into people's head. It's not that's what makes it an omniscient narrator and not a third-person limited but with no POV. But it's an omniscient narrator that cares about what people think, and also, there's narration. There's words that no one in the scene is thinking. This is the narrator saying this, the third-person omniscient narrator. similar to, like, what you'd see in Lord of the Rings. This man has kind of made me want to read more books from third-person Omniscient, to be honest. I hadn't read that much from third-person Omniscient, and I'm kind of liking it more and more. It kind of rules. And that was kind of the thing he did. And I just want to say, first-person Guy Gavriel Kay hits different. Like, I don't know what it is about first-person retrospective. I feel like first-person retrospective for a lot of authors kind of hits different, but that's also true for Guy Gavriel Kay. I don't think he would ever do a book that was only in first-person retrospective. Although I wonder if you read only the first-person retrospectives of this, whether it would make a complete narrative. I feel like it should make sense for it to, because the person, like the first-person narrator, which is Guiadagno Serra, I'm going to say the names wrong, they're Italian, doesn't know about the other stuff going on. I feel like they probably would. I might try doing that one day in the future, like only reading the first person stuff from this book and see what happens. Anyways, it could be interesting. The actual story, what it's about, the primary conflict is between two mercenary leaders, two very famous mercenary leaders who have kind of... They're the ones who do the fighting, and they're moderately powerful and moderately rich and have control of small cities, but mostly because of the power dynamic and the fact that they need money for food and to pay their men, they end up doing the bidding of the richer people who own bigger cities. And afterwards it says this was like one of an inspiration for the book, that the conflicts of the time in the area generally were between people who were not super, like, rich, but also, like, the leaders were never poor. They were always, like, pretty rich people who controlled, like, small cities. It actually, I think some of the thematic exploration of, like, how ridiculous the warfare was at the time is really interesting, where, because everyone is, like, mercenaries, and the amount of really competent army leaders is pretty low, what ends up happening is the mercenaries' armies don't end up directly fighting each other that much, because who cares? As long as they don't want to die, like, they're not fighting for where they live. There's not really a consequence if they don't fight. Like, people don't really have the option to not hire them next. On the other hand, while, like, actual army versus army violence is rare at the time, army versus civilian violence is not only common, it's, like, expected. It's, like, precedent. It's like, oh, yeah, when an army takes a city, they, like, they can take what they want and do what they want with it for 3 days. That's just kind of how it works. And just how stupid that is, and how completely morally absurd and bankrupt that is kind of one of the themes of this book. And I think a bunch of other Guy Gavriel Kay books, because I think historically, during, like, the Renaissance and Middle Ages, if you were being a soldier, like a mercenary or soldier in an army, would often decrease your chance of being killed by another person in an army. Your chance of dying from starvation or disease would probably go up. But, yeah, not nearly as much, like, army versus army violence, because no one, it takes two to play ball. And this mercenary versus mercenary, it's not like one is good, one is evil. It's very much a gray versus gray mercenary leader, where there's both, like, I at least came to both respect both of the mercenary leaders and be invested in them, while also being like, okay, these people have some serious moral failings. Both really interesting characters, actually. I mean, the amount of really interesting characters in 123,000 word standalone actually doesn't make sense. Like, I swear there's a million words. Like, I have not read a book that introduces more well-fleshed out characters in less time. Like, full stop. And I should say, I'm not sure, this is really close to being my favorite Guy Gavriel Kay book. I think Lord of Emperors is still my favorite, but it's really close. I actually think this is more impressive, but when I give a rating for a book, that is purely me trying to express how much I enjoyed reading it. It's not a measure of how impressive I think that book is. So, Lord of Emperors, which I think I enjoyed reading slightly more, has an entire setup book before it in Sailing to Sarantium, which is largely a setup book. That's why it's not one of my favorite Guy Gavriel Kay books, even though it's, like, very well written. Because, that duology basically should be one book. So Lord of Emperors gets to pay things off. Like, a lot. which gives it a huge advantage. This has to do both. This has to both set up and pay off. This has to introduce you to the world as well as tell the story and do it in way less time. It might be like one of the most impressive books I've ever read. And there's two other kind of main stories. The other, which is the first-person retrospective one, is from the point of view of Guidanio Serra. I'm not going to say that much of what he does, but he is going to interact with both of the mercenary captains, and he is... I'm not going to say that much about what he does, but the way he like interacts with both and ends up being important to the story, both because of his choices and also chance, is really, really good, and he's I think a brilliant character. The other two main characters is two women, one named Adria, who is you get introduced to very quickly. She's the second POV in the book after well, technically there's a tiny bit of Omniscient, and then there's a bit of first-person retrospective, and then you get the first Adria point of view, who's the daughter of like a really rich lord, but also works under one of the mercenary captains and is kind of trying to, see things and do things in her life before kind of the world is going to somewhat pigeonhole her and take away some of her options. And the other main one is Jelena, who's a healer that tends to kind of wander around the world and leave places pretty frequently. And they, both all, like, the kind of four main plot. And actually, I would even say there's another main character, one who I was not expecting to like, which is, his first name's Antonio something, Sardi. I'm bad at names. And he's actually the younger son, one of the bankers who controls like one of the biggest cities in the area. This entire place, it's all set in like the equivalent of the Italian peninsula. The kind of boot is removed, so Italy is a slightly more boring shape. There's no boot. That's the Italy. No, that's the Italy. It's hard to see because this is mirrored, so it's actually... That's the Italy bit. So no boot, and it's like 15th century, and so one of the characters is like the younger son of a banker who basically controls one of the cities, and I did not expect to enjoy this character as much as I did. He actually might be might be my favorite character of this book. I love this dude. He like... I don't know, I don't want to talk that much about him, but he's not full of himself. Like, things happen to him, and I just like the way he takes things in stride. And also, he's a really good character. I mean, there's a lot of really good character arcs. There are more really good character arcs in this book than what makes sense for a 400-page fantasy novel. It's wild. So those are kind of the main ones. This was really, there's most Guy Gavriel K books, a lot of them, I get to the end and I kind of think to myself, like, holy crap, every character was well fleshed out. There's a couple where that's not the case. It's one of the reasons why I gave River of Stars. I don't know if you guys follow me on Goodreads, or you'll see on the wrap-up. I gave River of Stars a slightly lower score than some of the other ones, and that's because partially River of Stars did not give the impression of, holy crap, every character is so well fleshed out, like A Brightness Long Ago did. Even though I think, or like Tigana did. I mean, Brightness Long Ago, stylistically, I think Guy Gavriel K has evolved since Tigana. I think he's a bit more subtle in how he gets emotions out of you and captivates you. I know I've seen some people complain about this for Tigana. It's actually kind of similar to what Erikson does. I've seen people complain about it from Malazan as well. As I really like both of those things, you can tell this doesn't bother me. But basically, I would say for Fionavar as well. Maybe even actually the most so in Fionavar. It kind of is like he's swinging for the fences with like every character interaction. Very similar actually, like, but for both Erikson and Guy Gavriel K and Tigana, what tends to happen with that is just a lot of like metaphorical home runs in this case, because for me, a lot of the time when him or Erikson swings for the fences, what I mean is like trying to get emotions out of like making every scene feel like really important and really emotional. And it works for me. He manages to write it in a way that I feel like everything is really important. And even things that shouldn't feel that important are. But I know some people who don't like Tigana as much, they say it just makes it feel melodramatic to them. Which I didn't have that experience, but I can see how one could have that experience. He's I think, a lot more subtle in how he how he hurts you as he gets later in his career. I think you don't see this a lot because what happens, I think, a lot is a lot of people... Everyone starts with Tigana. Everyone bloody starts with Tigana. And I love Tigana, so I'm not that mad about it, but it should not be the universal start place. And so what you get is you see all the people who start with Tigana and love Tigana and then don't like his other works as much, but you don't see all the people who actually like Tigana would have been one of their least favorite Guy Gavriel Kay books, and they end up liking a lot of his other works overwhelmingly more, because if they don't like Tigana, they just quit. But I'm sure there would be people who would be the other way around. Like if they read Sailing to Sarantium and the Sarantine Mosaic, they'd be like, oh my god, this is brilliant, and then they'd read Tigana and dislike it, but you just don't see it because everyone starts with Tigana. Anyways, that's my mini rant about how just everyone starts with Tigana, which is a fine place to start, but I think it's not the best place to start, but it's good. I mean, it's a good place to start. I think it's a brilliant book. But anyways, I would say if you read Tigana and you had that experience where you were like, hi Spoony, I'm talking to you here. But I'm sure other people as well, you're just an example. Spoony's a person on Discord who I know had this complaint where it just kind of felt like it was a bit much for him, and it ended up feeling melodramatic to him, which I know it didn't to me. But I would give this a try if that's the case, because I think the way emotions and like the way this book is compelling is a little bit more subtle. It's kind of, you read something and you're like, that was good, and then you think about it and you're like, oh, and you like put together the things that happen, and then the pain happens later. Which also, this book had one of the most emotionally evocative chapters I have read. I can think of like 4, like the last time a chapter hurt me as badly as this book did was like The Scholar's Tale or Assassin's Fate. And it was not one of those chapters where I think there's kind of 2 types of emotional moments. One is where the book hurts you, and then you put it down, and then you recover. Then you come back and you keep going. This was one where I read it, and I was like, that... I feel a sharp pain, that hurt. And then I put it down, and as I thought about it more and more, it just... like, the emotions got stronger for, like, an hour. And this was bad, because I read that chapter at, like, 2 a.m., so I ended up staying up till 3. Even not reading the book, like, the emotion just got stronger for, like, the rest of the night. Until I finally fell asleep. And that's the kind of thing this book, I think, does better than his earlier works. Even though stylistically it is slightly different, and it's kind of how he's evolved over time. It's been interesting to... I think I noticed this less dramatically because I went in publication order. It'd be interesting to see someone read Tigana and then read Brightness Long Ago and, like, skip the entire gap in the middle and see what that led to. Because I think it's been a pretty slow transition in style to being slightly more subtle. And anyways, I really enjoy both, obviously, based on the fact that Tigana, and as standalone books, if I rank my standalone books, I like both Tigana and A Brightness Long Ago more than every other standalone fantasy novel not written by Guy Gavriel Kay. So obviously both work for me, but I'm sure for various people there will be some who Tigana works better as a style for them, and some the later books do, or some the ones kind of in the middle do. Like I would say the Sarantine Mosaic and Under Heaven are kind of in between. Also, I just want to mention, this book's really tightly placed. Like, a lot happens. Obviously, a lot happens, like, in terms of establishing characters. I've talked about that. But even from a plot perspective, there are kind of 3 distinct parts. And quite a lot happens in this book. You do have to be ready for non-linear storytelling, where, like, I think very few people do non-linear storytelling as well, where you hop, like... Not every chapter does not necessarily all take place in the previous chapter. If you were to plot out the timeline of a Guy Gavriel Kay book relative to chronological through the book, it'd be kind of all over the place. I find I'm basically never confused, despite the fact that he doesn't actually tell me what the timescale is. It's almost always quite obvious what it is. He's very, very good, I think, at non-linear storytelling, to the degree where I think it almost always adds to it. Anyways, that's going to continue here. Not quite. I think the one he's done that the most in is the Sarantine Mosaic. It might be one of the reasons it's one of the more, like, slightly more challenging reads, but Guy Gavriel Kay is not a super challenging author. I think his prose is gorgeous, but I don't think it's super dense. I think it's probably... I mean, I think it's gotten kind of better over time, but the more challenging aspect of it is the POV, like the omniscient and the first-person mix. I know can mess some people up, and how non-linear it is. I think Tigana probably is a little more linear. Maybe that's another reason some people like it more, but I think he does it really well. So yeah, I think there's only really 2 reasons this narrowly misses out on being my favorite Guy Gavriel Kay book. The first is, as I said, Lord of Emperors had an entire book of setup, so it can pay off for like an entire book. So that helps. And the second is, this book has a horse race, and I swear Guy Gavriel Kay writes like fictional horse races that are more compelling than like actual sporting events that are happening live. Doesn't make sense. He gives emotional stakes to a horse race. There's a particular thing that I'm not going to talk about that he did for this. It was brilliant. But I thought the chariot race, as cool as this horse race does, it was about 54% less cool than the chariot race in Lord of Emperors, which was like mega brilliant. So that's the edge Lord of Emperors gets, and why this is my second favorite Guy Gavriel Kay book and not my first. Okay, I think that's Oh, I just want to mention the start of this book, because I think a lot of the time authors go in one of 2 ways to start a book. They either do the more classic fantasy way to go, which is really start slow, very slice of life, really establish the characters in the world, which works for fantasy fans, but you end up with slightly uneventful starts. Alternatively, some books start with stuff happening, and it's like you really gets the plot working, but it makes it a lot harder to establish the characters. I think Kay here managed to have his cake and eat it too, because a lot happens in the first part of this book. Like, it's not slice of life at all. It's like really life-changing events are happening to people, but also it establishes all the characters and the world to a fantastic degree. One thing I'm kind of curious, so this is in the same connected world as a lot of his other books, and one of the reoccurring motives of this world is the religions. There's like there's a religion that's the equivalent of Christianity, which worship Jad, which is the sun, and then there's the Asherites, which are the equivalent of Islam, which worship the stars, and then there's the Kindath, which have the 2 moons. I've never felt in the later books like he's using exposition to say what these are. I'd be curious to see whether how like well that was communicated to someone who started here, because it never felt like I was being reminded of something that I already knew. But also, I think the people who've talked with Lucas, you watch my videos, I think, maybe. If you're still here, would you remember when you read that? Did it feel well communicated to you? I'm curious, because I'm wondering if I don't know if he's managed to do both, like communicate it well without feeling like he's reminding people, or if the world might have felt slightly harder to get into because of that. I feel like it's probably the first. I feel like it would actually be well established. Normally I just give people a pass when there's like long series. Dresden and Wheel of Time do this, and I mean basically every series does this, where they'll remind you of things because people don't have perfect memories. But if I think about it, I never remember that getting exposited. Anyway, I think that's long enough for this video. Those of you curious to score, I gave this 9.7, which is the same score I originally gave Lord of Emperors, but over time I bumped up Lord of Emperors to 9.8. They're neck and neck, though. This is the best standalone book I think I've ever read. I am going to very shortly be making my top 10 standalone books. I am going to read Children of Earth and Sky first, even though I'm pretty confident from what I've heard it's not going to be as good as Brightness Long Ago. But I would feel really dumb if I made that list and then I like Children of Earth and Sky really more, and my new number one, and like I read a standalone book like a week after making a top standalone list, and it became my new favorite standalone. But as of now, I'm giving away what's going to happen in that list. For those of you who've made it this far in the video, you now know what my top standalone list. So you can put in the comments that you get to be smug while watching my standalone list, because you know what one is going to be. It's going to be this. This is, I think, the best standalone book I've ever read, while being really easy to get into. It doesn't require you to trust the author that much, and it's short. I don't know. It's wizardry. I'd highly recommend reading it. I mean, this video was basically just me hyping it for I don't even know how long. A while. So, have a nice day, everyone. Let me know if you've read A Brightness Long Ago. Do you agree with me? Yeah, I think this is a viable place to start the author. Maybe Sarantine first, but it should be fine either way. Have a nice day, everyone.